Jeremiah 23 and hoods. And today we're going to be talking about the scripture that says God brought them out of Egypt. He heard their cry, then he seen their affliction. He looked on their affliction. Their groanings had came unto him. And what was the scenario? They were being used. So usury and greedy gang, the prophets Micah, Zephaniah, Isaiah, Haggai, and the Jeremiah and Amos, and all the rest of those prophets prophesied about usury and greedy of gain. You can just put it in Bible usury. It'll pop up. You'll see all those scriptures that God hates the idea of usury. When he talked about Micah 2:1-2, how they dreamed on their beds or how they're going to come up off the poor's back, we can see a whole scenario of oppression right there. And they began to oppress their neighbors, their brothers, their strangers. They broke the covenants of God. They were very religious during the time of Micah and Amos. Churches were packed out. You see, just the opposite. But their hearts were far from him. He told them to Isaiah 58, when Isaiah showed up, and told them to give out of their need to the poor. And simply put, you got one can of beans, you share with your neighbor. That's how the widow lady easily could bake the cake for the prophet Elijah. She gave out of her need, and they both were sustained. And why is that? Because she gave out of her need. She did what John the Baptist told the religious leaders of his day to be in order to, in that time, receive the Lord. Give out of your need. In other words, you got one can of beans, you think you're going to die. Split it with your neighbor, and you'll die in the royal law, if that's the case. You see, that's why the meal didn't fail the woman, because this miracle was in the sharing. So when she shared with the prophet Elijah, who was hungry, and he told her to bake that cake, and the meal did not fail, it was simply put, because she obeyed the law of giving and loving her neighbor as herself, God automatically will sustain the one who will help sustain their brother. And we see that when they were being used and they were being oppressed to build the kingdoms of Pharaoh, that God looked upon their affliction. That's what the scripture says. So what affliction? The taskmasters were brutal. They were harsh. They were cruel. They made merchandise out of people. Something like what happened in the Congo with the Belgians, with the 10 million that got taken away down there, or when the French invaded Haiti, or when Spain took over the Dominican Republic, and so forth and so on. You see that people were used, and the great conquest in Africa, as well as here, when we saw what happened to the African Americans. So usury for greedy gain is the opposite of giving. It is the opposite, because the user, we've seen General Motors in Detroit get rich off a whole bunch of people and then move out for a lower wage. A lot of companies did that, forgetting the ones that made them. That's usury for greedy gain. And as a result, they went into poverty. And of course, you flood impoverished people with drugs, and they eventually will destroy themselves. We know what the textbook conditions is for crime and violence. It is poverty, number one. Oppression sets over that, in my opinion. And then you have the crime, and then you add the criminal records to jobs, and then you have the capitalists moving out of the neighborhoods to hire those particular people. And so in certain neighborhoods, and to make money. I mean, capitalism is about money. We don't have a country that is love thy neighbor as thyself, not in business. So it's bottom line, I got my money, now I love you, but it's an individual thing. So each group must scrap for their collective power and as a group of investors with big C to make and play the capitalist game so that you can bring relief upon the brethren that have been afflicted, who have grown and sisters to God, and God has seen their affliction, heard their groanings, see the usury. And I could just one incident was the Social Security people that I knew that I used to visit 40 years, one person in particular, and several other oxygen things they carried, were in a complex, and they came in 30 days and told them that the rent doubled. They didn't have enough to move 3 times their rent. So they used them. The new owner came in with usury on his mind, totally disregarding the people. That's to make merchandise out of people. So they were made merchandise out of the children of Israel, building the kingdoms of this world. And we see that today with the press. So therefore, it is, over the next 10 years, a good idea, if God saw the affliction, for us to look at it too, and look at the realities of what's going on in housing, healthcare, and in, but mostly housing. And that is a big thing, a real big thing. So if you have the right conditions, such as guns, that come in with drugs, and you have poverty and lack of jobs, you will have violence and murder and death and genocide. That's worldwide. You throw a W on it if you want to, but it's worldwide. So those conditions, most people that are intellectuals already know. So they allow the conditions, then they flood them with guns. And any person worked there, saw from LA, from Tookie Williams, who started the Crips, to the BJ the Bounty Hunter, who testifies on his YouTube channel that they gave him guns and drugs. And I'm a witness, being from South Central LA, being raised there from 71, went to Bret Hart, Washington, and LaSalle back in the 70s. I'm a witness of what happened in the 80s. That's exactly what happened. So sort of like if you look at like Detroit, when the jobs left there, the heroin flooded in. It's funny that Afghanistan funk is, some documentaries, 3/4 of heroin comes from there. We just occupied there, just left, spent $1 trillion. But the point is that heroin found its way to Detroit, Michigan, and LA, and Chicago, Harlem. So the bottom line is capitalism has no friends. If it's product and it's supply and demand, and we know how the game goes. So that's every reason why, as collective groups, 2 are better than 1, we should help each other and look for those that are afflicted. And knowing that God said, if you help the poor, you lend to the Lord, he shall repay you. And focus over the next 10 years on family and friends, close friends, relatives, church folks, and all kind of people that comes across our life, and be ready to distribute as the Lord lead. And those collective groups that can do bigger jobs, like relieving housing, and like build condos and keep it affordable and stuff like that, that'll be really nice. Or your elders and your disabled people and all the people that you might have in your community, at your churches and your mosque and your different places where you gather. The universal principle here is loving your neighbor as yourself. So just remember, when he's seen their affliction and he heard their cry, God intended to do something about it. Like John in 1 John said, if you see your brother have need, shut your bowels of compassion. What good is your religion? Especially if that's your family member. Isaiah 58 says, doesn't hide yourself from your own flesh. That means relatives, elders, people that are buffeting inflation. And if you're a leader, you're not thinking, how can I get something to exploit the people, the poor? You are thinking, if you're in alignment like them stars and like them trees, how to give back. Oxygen, how much does it cost from the trees? Okay, so you're thinking, we got to give. And we know we got to give. We got to help. We got to show and witness to those people that are afflicted that are among us, and we must communicate, be ready to distribute, because God has heard their cry. He has seen their tears. He has heard their